Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry. In today's course we continue our preparation for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administration exam. We've spent a lot of time working with file systems during this course, whether they be local or remote. We've looked at how to format file systems, logical volume groups, how to mount them, how to add them so that they start during the boot process. And we've talked about the fstab file in terms of what to add so that a system will boot with that particular file system, local or remote, mounted. But let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into the etc fstab. So if you've been following along to this point, you won't have a lot of typing to do in this one. This one's more conceptual so that you understand what and why we've added to the fstab files, what all of those individual entries are. So let's take a look at our etc fstab. So if we look at our etc fstab, and we have a number of different things. So let's start at the very top. Generally at the top, you will see the local file systems that correspond with physical devices in your system that are mounted. In this case, I see 3 UUID devices, which I can correspond to the first disk in my system in various partitions. I've got a root partition, my boot partition, and swap. And then it tells me other things about it. So the first field is the device name. And although you can put the actual device name like dev SDA1, SDA2, SDA3, we've mentioned in the past that that's not the safest way to mount a physical disk system, since if you move the disk system around to other ports, add additional disks, those device names or device references can change. However, a UUID is the unique identifier that, regardless of where it sits in the system, will allow it to be correctly mounted to its mount point associated in the fstab file. So the UUID is a reference to the device name. This second field is the mount point on which the device is going to be mounted. In this case, the root file system for this disk is mounted here. And the third field being the system, the file system type. ext2, ext3, ext4, xfs, jfs, riserfs, swap, which we have down here, etc., etc. Those are the kinds of file systems that you'll find mounted here. And if you look down here, we've got even more information from a mount point remotely to a local mount using CIFS, which has some additional information, which brings us to this right here. So the fourth field describes the options that we use to mount our system drives or our remote drives. We can use auto, no auto, exec, no exec, user, no user. So auto would specify that the device or partition needs to be automatically mounted on boot time, and no auto specifies the device should be explicitly mounted, meaning manually. I'll have to do either a mount command or a mount-A. For -exec and no exec, those mean that files that exist in that device will either be able to execute or not execute. So partitions that are really intended to keep non-executable files like /var or /temp, you can put no exec in these options right here. And then -user and no user specifies whether a user will be able to mount the partition, or that no user meaning that only the root user can mount the partition. So in this case, the defaults apply to this specific set of mounts: the root, the boot, and the swap, meaning that users can unmount or mount, you can execute, and that it should be automatically mounted on boot. So it's equivalent of auto, exec, and user, but rather than type auto, comma, exec, comma, user, comma, we don't have to do any of those things. We can just put in defaults. What are the numbers, though, on the outside here in what we would call the fifth and sixth fields? So in the fifth field right here, this option is used by the dump program. So in this case, if the value were set to 0, then the partition is excluded from taking backup. But if the option is non-zero, the device can be backed up. The sixth field is the FSCK option. If this value is set to 0, the device or partition is excluded from an FSCK check. So my root partition is excluded from the FSCK check on boot, so that it can be checked first by FSCK. In here, for the boot partition, again, this would end up being checked second, and 0 would be excluded. You will generally always see 0 for a remote file system to be excluded. Now, these are special entries here in the fstab directory, or the fstab file, for mounting special kinds of file systems. These are set up during boot, including the GID or modes. You generally will not do anything with those. And in fact, if you remove them, you can have anything from temporary file system, what are called shim errors, or you can have your PTS devices and your terminals complain that those don't exist. So you might not be able to log in. So these devices in fstab, you're generally not going to deal with, and in fact, don't make any changes to them. Which is one of the reasons why you'll see the file systems that are local generally at the top of fstab, and you'll see remote file systems that are right underneath of there. So at a high level, that's what all of the fstab entries mean and why we do them. So in short, first is the device, the second field is the mount point, the third field is the file system type, then the file system mount options, which defaults, again, would be the user has the ability to mount and unmount. They have the ability to execute files on the drive. It has execute files on it, and it should automatically mount during boot. And then whether and when FSCK checks the file system and whether that file system can be backed up or not. So those are the file system credentials and options that you're going to be looking for, whether it's a local or remote file system. If we look at the CIFS down here, we've passed in additional information like credentials equals. We had a specific option we wanted to pass, but everything else was the default options for that particular file system. So that's all there is to our Etsy FSTab directories. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.